Welcome to the Physician Associate Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Physician Associate Podcast. My name is James. And Nana, if I ask you to introduce yourself first.
So my name is Nana Amoasi. I'm one of the Physician Associates here in Oxford. I work as an improvement fellow trainee, trying to build a better relationship between junior doctors and physician associates.
And Jeremy, can you introduce yourself as well, please?
My name's Jeremy.noble. I am an Associate Dean at Thames Valley with a broad remit of workforce transformation. So I look after the Physician Associate Programme for the southeast of England.
Thanks so much for joining me both. Really appreciate you giving up the time. So Nana, I was really interested to hear about the work you were doing to build those bridges between doctors and physician associates. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how the scheme first came together?
So I didn't know much about it, but I thought just apply and see. And at the interview, they laid out that is what they were looking for, someone to join the group of trainees. And the aim is to work with the junior doctors to kind of shape a better working life, and we knew, or there was some background information about some level of conflict between the physician associate coming in and junior doctors. And so the post was really to try and set the foundation of how to build that relationship up in our trust, since it's fairly new to physician associates to begin with.
And the context at the time when this job advert was being thought through was on the back of the junior doctor hospital strike and all of the contract negotiations that have been going on.
Yeah, so when the junior doctor strike was resolved, there was a slight disparity, as ever, with these conflicts as to why the strike actually went ahead. A lot of it was perceived just to be down to pay, but as usual, it reached much further than that, and it was really down to the way that junior doctors were being treated in the workplace and their status and their relationship with the trusts. And I think, to be fair, the government recognised this and empowered Health Education England to look into improving their working lives. And the way we dealt with this locally was to advertise for improvement fellows to bring quality improvement projects to the table that would influence the way that junior hospital doctors were perceived in the workplace and how they might be more valued and recognised. All of those projects went extremely successfully. So since that time, we have appointed tranches of replacement. So most of these trainees are appointed for a year. They take a period of time out of the week, which we pay for, so they continue their clinical training but have some protected time to do these quality improvement projects. And then we were aware that there was a potential conflict based on a BMA report from the Junior Hospital Doctors Committee, that there was the potential for a flashpoint between physician associates joining the workforce and interfering with training of junior doctors. So we thought that if we appointed a physician associate, nobody would be better to look into the potential of these issues, and if there were issues, how to deal with them. And Nana is our first physician associate who's joined the improvement fellow team.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. That really helps to understand the concept behind the post. So, Nana, what sort of expectations did you have at the start when you were applying?
So looking into what the problem really is, I'd mentioned about doing a survey, just gauge where things were with the junior doctors to start with. And then at some point down the line, we had a conversation, Jeremy and I, about the fact that you cannot build a relationship with someone you don't have. So the trust is lacking physician associates to start with. So why don't we take it from there? Get the physician associate in the trust and then try and build a relationship. You need that exposure, Those conflicts or misconceptions are sometimes demystified when you have people in that position working with you. So with support from Jeremy, I set up an engagement event with the clinical directors of the trust And surprisingly, a good majority turned up. And what I'd done was I'd line up a few cases to showcase what physician associates are doing in a trust. So our trust employs close to about 12,000 people, and it only employs 6 physician associates. So I'd highlighted that to them in the email to the clinical directors and said, it will be imperative that the trust gets on board with employing physician associates, and as a very huge trust. And hopefully that will be the foundation to build a better relationship with the junior doctors, or one of the foundations to build a better relationship with them. So we had that meeting. I invited my mentor, who's a supervisor and a consultant in my department, some junior doctors to speak, some registrars who used to teach us to speak, just showcasing what, and I did a presentation as well. And I had a colleague, our physician associate lead, who is also a lecturer in a university, talk about student placement. So that's another way of getting PAs into trust. If you cannot employ them directly, why don't they make them students and then employ them? And on top of that, I set up the survey to the junior doctors. And funny enough, most people have heard about physician associates outside OUH. The majority have not. So that's a huge gap that we can bridge with this employment. And hopefully once we take the survey again, fingers crossed, those numbers will change for the better. So that's part of it. And the other opportunity that came with this post is to be part of what they call an emerging leaders
in organisation,
program. So
especially
the
as
trust
large,
has
as you're describing,
an emerging leaders program, bringing MDT group of doctors, nurses, physios,
phrases or
and we go through
conversations that you've had that stick in your mind
with support from a group of fellows themselves who have done the job or done the training. And again, it is a space where physician associates, nurses, and doctors are working together to solve this problem. And that also raises the awareness and bring the profile of our profession in the trust. So that's another opportunity that has come by that, when I'm not doing this survey or meeting, that's what I do as well. And in addition, I run the OUH teaching sessions monthly. So I take time, email people from different specialties. Again, junior doctors, a lot of them, as part of their training, need signing off to be able to teach. So I invite them, give them an opportunity to, why don't you come and teach a physician associate, and, that stems off conversations. Oh, I didn't know there were PAs in the trust. So can you come and talk to us about, so I'm getting consultants involved, I'm getting junior doctors involved. I do get nurses involved as well, as you will expect, different people had different ideas. And one person, asked, why should we employ physician associates as opposed to, advanced nurse practitioners? And that was an opportunity to then highlight the differences between physician associates and what they bring to the trust. So education, from those conversations that you've had, education has been a big thing that I felt, instead of button heads or meeting them at that point of contention, take the opportunity to educate and hopefully shine more light on what what value this post brings to those departments. We're not here to take your jobs. We're here to add value to the job and ultimately serve the NHS workforce. There's so many people out there with varying degrees of undergraduate programs that fit the model, but haven't got the opportunity to get into different programs like medicine that will benefit from being physician associate and add value to the NHS workforce. So instead of the other professionals looking at it as a competition, i.e. the junior doctors and the nurses, this has added value. It is here to support, to augment your role, to make it better, free up time to do the important things rather than burdening yourself and being worn out, which is one of the things that came up from the strike consultation. This is just to alleviate some of those pressures and also give opportunity to so many people who have otherwise would be struggling to find work to start with. This physician associate job has so many opportunities. There's more jobs out there are applicants. It is changing a little bit, but there's always more jobs out there. So That is how I see it. Anytime anyone comes up with anything, take the opportunity to educate them and showcase your work. What do you do in your department? What else is out there that can be done? There's always opportunity to update yourself and showcase.
Absolutely. And actually, that touches on something I wanted to ask. I don't know whether you might have any thoughts on this, Jeremy. Supply and demand of PA students and the number of jobs that are coming through. Do you see a tipping point at that? Do you see a scale of how many PAs can come out and whether there will be jobs in the future, whether this is going to be successful, or is it going to be a flash in the pan that doesn't get supported and dries up?
Yeah, well, I hope the answer to your question is that there will be a symbiotic balance between the number of physician associates that the universities train and the opportunities in the NHS workforce. If you look at the wider picture of healthcare in the country, there are other opportunities for physician associates. One of the effects of the COVID pandemic, I would predict that there will be a lot more use of the private or the non-NHS sector, whichever way you want to look at it, to deliver healthcare either on behalf of the NHS or for people who perhaps have savings and funding who don't want to sit on the long waiting lists that have been created by the pandemic, who would be prepared to shift into the private sector. And I think private providers will begin to look at the value that physician associates can bring. Sort of linking in with part of what Nana said, the solution to this is firstly to make sure that the universities don't go on a one-way course to just train more and more PAs because it suits their portfolio and their business plans for training graduate students to become physician associates, or even open up, the relatively new undergraduate courses that are available. And simultaneously going to the trusts and explaining what value physician associates can bring. And I'm sure you'll come back to this, but it's been extremely interesting if you look at the remit of the project that Nana was originally sort of tasked in doing, which was to look at what are the pressures on the sort of front line between junior doctors and physician associates, and the way junior doctors are trained and how physician associates might help or hinder that. And in fact, for reasons we might discuss, the project has moved beyond that and opened some very interesting questions and issues that perhaps weren't evident when we set out on this project. And what's becoming interesting, and I don't want to preempt the outcome of Nana's project, but what's becoming evident from my experience is that there's very rarely any friction between junior doctors and physician associates. And that concern that the British Medical Association Junior Hospital Doctors Committee had raised, at least in my experience, it is not a big issue. And in fact, as soon as the two groups get used to each other, everybody's more than happy, rather than necessarily taking out any conflicts, developing any conflicts. Now, I'm a consultant in Oxford, and we have a huge teaching hospital with, every department nearly you could wish for or have. And yet we have been extraordinarily slow in picking up physician associates because there was initial teething problems in getting the local university to train PAs. So we don't have our own PA program here. The clinicians aren't used to them, and the clinicians are therefore very wary of taking them on. So the work that Nana's doing now is extraordinarily refreshing to see how departments would engage. So that's the first issue. The second issue is with consultants themselves. And as with all consultant practice, and I would probably include GPs in this as well, although I can't speak for GPs, amongst a group of consultants, there is a natural hesitation in adopting new practices. And a fear or a concern that if you have a physician associate who's doing clinical work under your name, that you feel vulnerable and exposed, and therefore reluctance to take it on. And indeed, old-fashioned practices of, why should somebody else do this work, which should be done by a doctor, which shows a real lack of understanding of how junior doctors need to be trained now, and the reduced hours that they can work, etc. The pressures that are on our young training doctors are completely different, for instance, from when I trained all those years ago. And so that's a challenge. But for every consultant that's a little bit slow and resistant, we have a cohort of really enthusiastic consultants, and Nana alluded to some that she's engaged with. And that they're very important to enroll, to spread the word, as it were. The biggest issue is with senior nurses. So once again, the junior nurses, and Nana will correct me if I'm wrong, but at the workplace, as soon as people get used to working with each other, the day-to-day working lives of both groups seem to be enhanced, and that hasn't, to my mind, been a problem. But senior nurses regard physician associates in many cases as a real threat for two reasons. One is that there's a workforce transformation route to advanced care practice, of which nurses form, I guess, the bulk. And they see that threatened by physician associates. And secondly, physician associates actually carry a little bit of a cost benefit to trusts. So if you look at the banding structure for a physician associate, at the moment, that is cheaper than an advanced care practitioner being promoted to a senior role, because most of the advanced care practitioners who are nurses are already on fairly high banding. And when they move into advanced care practice, they sort of see that, and indeed their nursing managers see that as a promotion. So they go right onto the very top bands and are therefore less, if you like, cost efficient than a physician associate may be. Now, that may be a temporary balance, and maybe once the pay structures of senior workforce members, physician associates or nurses is equated, then that may disappear. But and lastly, and I think the senior nurse is aware of this, as a consultant, the real beauty of a physician associate is that you very much work to a medical model. And correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly in my experience, they fit in very, very smoothly with the sort of firm or departmental structure. And they report, as it were, up the line to a consultant or maybe to a GP principal. And the as it were, the governance trail is very clear cut. And I guess the last thing, looking at the broader issue of work transformation, which is beginning to be realised, is that nurses are a very valuable resource because we need them to be nurses. And if you take a senior nurse out of nursing practice and put them into advanced care, you steal a nurse from the workforce. You're sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul. Whereas with physician associates, you have a new sort of untapped resource. that is there to be utilised. So that is a huge advantage at the moment.
I think a lot of universities are trying to put that bottleneck approach there. I was looking at St. George's now doing UCAT. I know Queen Mary was doing from beginning, but now like universities are from the gate to entering into the course are now putting, stops. So who knows, as you said, might trickle to the employment.
Yeah. Does that worry you, having those sort of entry requirements to the course?
It's both ways. One, it means that people who are actually passionate about the course and are interested in it will be applying and, apply themselves, because now there's funding. When we were applying, there wasn't funding. So you must be very passionate about it to put your money where your mouth is. For us now, there's funding. So people are just applying because I'll get the money. What is there to lose? If you don't do well, you don't owe anyone anything. So they have to put those checks in to make sure that despite the money, are you actually wanting to do this? And that makes for better physician associates at the end, because you don't want to churn out half-cooked physician associate who had the money and the university had the interest and you did a wrong marriage, if you like.
Yeah, I agree. I totally take that point. I guess one of my concerns is that we don't want to limit the type of person who's going into the profession. I quite like the fact that, certainly in my experience, the type of people who are going into PA school tend to be slightly different to those who would go into medical school. And it recruits from a slightly wider background, socio-economic background, racial backgrounds. There's more females than males, slightly different demographic of people that are going into the PA profession. It widens the access into good healthcare jobs for those people. I'm slightly worried that introducing UK cats and things like that will narrow it down again.
But that's one of the beauties of the physician associate job, is that you can have a department employing maybe 5 physician associates, all of them with different undergrad backgrounds. So you add that value. So I have a pharmacy background, you have biochemistry background, you have chemistry background, and we can all view those lenses as and when we need it in the department to the benefit and add value to the department. So, yeah, I agree.
Which brings me to my final question I had to ask Nana. A tough question. I don't quite know how to phrase it politely. How will your success be measured? How will you know that you've done a good job on the improvement trainee?
So a few things, but the main thing I'm hoping that in the future, physician associate will not be like an auxiliary role, like an option. It will be framed into policy. You know how when they do workforce planning for a department, it wouldn't be nurses, doctors, and physician associate, like a mandatory number set in stone. And if employers don't want to employ physician associate, it's not going to be from a place of ignorance, but they've had all the information and they are making an informed decision to say, actually, I don't want to employ this person, rather than, I've never had one before, I'm set in my old ways. No, that the information is out there for you. That's my hope, is that having these junior doctors from the ground build a relationship, will become consultants who are informed. So that if they're saying no, it's no from a genuine place, I've considered A, B, C, D, E, versus no, when I was a junior doctor, we didn't like them and end of. As we have with the nurses and the consultants, decades later. We don't want to get to that level.
From my perspective, if you like, as Nana's supervisor in her fellowship role, I think a positive outcome is that Nana has asked some questions and she's demonstrated how she's gone about answering those questions and has got some answers, even if they're preliminary. But most important of all, rather like our discussion today, the discussion raises more questions than answers. And for every project we dream up, it spawns 1, 2, 3, 4 more projects for next year and the next year, because quality improvement and engagement is very much an ongoing and evolving subject. And what might be true in 2021 may be completely different in 2023 or 2025. And certainly in your two working lives, I would think it very depressing if we were discussing the same pressures in 20 years' time. I would really hope that the health service has evolved and developed so that we're dealing with different problems on a very regular basis. Because if we're dealing with the same problems, then we haven't really made any progress.
So many questions coming to my mind. I totally agree. It makes a lot of sense. 20, 30 years hence, I wonder if PAs will be relatively well established. There'll be senior PAs that are in senior decision-making and leadership roles. The next workforce transformation, whatever that comes through, whatever the next new kid on the block will be, I hope that the PAs are there to support and pull up and help whatever the next change is, rather than having an attitude of being closed off and anti anything new. Fingers crossed.
Definitely.
If anybody would like to discuss further, how we set this up and the advantages of it, etc., I'd be delighted to talk to anybody about it.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for joining me. And I'll leave both of your contact details in the show notes below so that people who are listening to the episodes can find how to get in contact with you there. And also thanks to you guys for listening and supporting the show. I hope you found that a really useful and interesting discussion. If you'd like to connect with the PA podcast, we're on social media at PA Podcast UK, and I hope you'll join me again for the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Physician Associate Podcast.